June 28, 1941. Quonset Point Naval Air Station, Rhode Island. A bitter Atlantic wind swept across the naval base as engineers huddled over a set of blueprints pinned beneath coffee mugs and grease-stained hands. The smell of saltwater mingled with machine oil and hot steel. Outside, cranes groaned over the harbor, lifting crates stamped U.S. Navy. Inside the drafting hangar, a small team of engineers was being asked to do the impossible. Lieutenant Commander Peter de Jong, a naval engineer with wire-rimmed glasses and a sleeve perpetually stained with pencil graphite, stood at the center of the table. "Gentlemen," he said, tapping the drawing board with a metal ruler, "we need a building that can be shipped anywhere in the world, built by men who've never held a wrench before, and strong enough to take a beating from monsoons, bombs, and God knows what else." The United States was not yet officially at war, but the world was already burning. American factories were shifting toward full-scale military production, and the Navy faced a logistical nightmare: how to build instant bases in jungles, deserts, and frozen islands, anywhere American troops might land. Traditional barracks were heavy, slow to build, and required trained carpenters and masons. The Navy needed something different, something fast, portable, and foolproof. De Jong's team studied British Nissen huts, curved metal shelters used during World War I. They were clever, but flawed, too narrow, too hard to insulate, and nearly impossible to adapt to tropical climates. The Americans wanted to improve it, to create a structure that could go from blueprint to battlefield in days. Engineer Donald Kirkpatrick, fresh from Brown University, pointed to the semicircular design sketched across the paper. "If we use corrugated steel panels with a lightweight frame," he said, "we can get the strength of an arch without the weight of beams or columns." De Jong nodded slowly. "And if we bolt it to a wooden foundation, it can sit on mud, sand, or coral. Anywhere the Navy wants it." A gust of wind rattled the hangar doors, and the blueprints fluttered. Outside, thunder rumbled over Narragansett Bay, an omen of storms to come. The men worked through the night, refining the curvature, calculating stress tolerances, and testing steel thickness. Every rivet and panel was measured for efficiency. Every angle was drawn with one goal: survival. By dawn, they had a name, Quonset Hut, after the very place it was born. It was small, ugly, and unlike anything the Navy had ever built. But it could be packed into a single wooden crate, shipped across an ocean, and assembled by 6 men in under a day. As the first prototype rose on the windswept field, its arch caught the morning sun like the ribcage of a metallic whale. Workers stepped back, squinting. The corrugated steel gleamed silver against the dark sea. De Jong placed his hand on the curved wall and smiled. "This," he said quietly, "is how we'll build an empire, one hut at a time." What no one could yet imagine was how this humble design would soon circle the globe, from the jungles of Guadalcanal to the deserts of North Africa, surviving storms, bomb blasts, and the unforgiving heat of war. December 1941. Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Within days, the United States was at war, and every factory, foundry, and shipyard in the nation shifted into overdrive. The humble Quonset Hut, barely 6 months old, was suddenly at the center of a military logistics revolution. At the Davisville Construction Battalion Center in Rhode Island, steam hissed from locomotive vents as rows of freight cars lined the yard. Inside the warehouses, sparks flew from welding torches as thousands of curved steel panels were stamped, corrugated, and drilled with machine precision. The rhythmic clang of metal against metal became the soundtrack of American ingenuity. Lieutenant Commander de Jong returned to oversee the transition from prototype to production. The Navy Bureau of Yards and Docks had placed an order for 16,000 Quonset huts, an unthinkable number for a design that didn't exist a year before. In the cavernous assembly hall, a young naval architect named Harold Pearson called out to his men over the roar of machines. "Every panel must match within a 1/16 of an inch. These huts are going to the jungle, the desert, and the Arctic. If they don't fit, they fail." Each hut was made of lightweight corrugated steel ribs, bolted together over an arched skeleton. The curved design wasn't just aesthetic, it was functional geometry. The arch distributed stress evenly, allowing the structure to withstand high winds and even shockwaves from nearby explosions. To prevent tropical heat buildup, engineers added an inner layer of insulation made from pressed wood fiber, sandwiched between the corrugated panels. Ventilation hatches ran along the ridge to release heat and humidity. Windows could be added or removed. Wooden floors lifted the men above mud and floodwater. Every bolt, beam, and bracket was standardized. That meant that a Quonset hut built in California could be repaired with parts from Rhode Island, or rebuilt entirely by sailors halfway across the Pacific. Crates labeled QH-20 began leaving the docks of Quonset Point by the thousands. Each contained everything needed for a full hut: 16 curved ribs, 700 bolts, pre-cut plywood flooring, and a single instruction manual printed with the Navy's proud seal. The manual read: Assembly time, 6 men, 8 hours. It was simple, but to the engineers who designed it, it was nothing short of revolutionary. At first, soldiers and sailors laughed at the design. "Looks like half a barrel," one Marine quipped as he watched the first Quonset rise at Camp Lejeune. But by nightfall, when the rain came and the hut held firm against 50-mile-an-hour gusts, the laughter stopped. By early 1942, the huts were everywhere. They lined the airfields of Hawaii, the beaches of Guadalcanal, and the frozen decks of Aleutian outposts. They became field hospitals, mess halls, workshops, and command centers. In North Africa, their arched roofs deflected desert winds and sand. In the jungles of the Solomons, they resisted rot, mold, and monsoon storms. Everywhere they went, the huts took on new lives. Mechanics turned them into aircraft hangars. Doctors made them operating theaters. Pilots used them as briefing rooms before dawn raids. The curved steel huts became more than just buildings, they became symbols of adaptability and American resilience. One night, as de Jong walked along the Rhode Island docks, watching the last shipment bound for the Pacific disappear into the fog, he realized something profound. His little invention, born from pencil sketches and sleepless nights, was now a silent soldier, spreading across the globe faster than any fleet. The Quonset hut wasn't just surviving war. It was shaping it. January 1943. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The jungle steamed beneath a merciless tropical sun. Cicadas screamed from the treetops, and the air smelled of rot, cordite, and diesel. In a clearing hacked from the dense foliage, a group of Seabees, the Navy's construction battalions, wrestled with curved sheets of corrugated steel, their faces slick with sweat and red mud. "Hold that rib steady," shouted Chief Petty Officer Raymond Holt, his voice straining over the growl of generators. "If this thing can survive a Rhode Island winter, it can sure as hell take a Pacific monsoon." 8 men worked in rhythm, bolting the arched ribs into place. Each section slid into the next with a satisfying clunk, forming a gleaming half-cylinder in the middle of chaos. Within hours, the Quonset hut rose like a silver shell amid the green inferno, its walls reflecting sunlight, its frame solid against the soft, treacherous earth. By dusk, the men were inside, setting up cots, lanterns, and typewriters. The first gusts of evening rain hammered against the steel, but the sound was comforting, a metallic heartbeat that meant shelter, safety, and a small slice of civilization in the middle of nowhere. The Seabees knew the value of speed. Every hour saved in building meant another hour defending the perimeter or repairing an airstrip. And the Quonset hut delivered, 8 hours from crates to comfort. No blueprints, no carpenters, no guesswork. The huts multiplied like mushrooms after rain. On Guadalcanal, they housed radar stations and medical wards. On Espiritu Santo, they became aircraft repair bays. At Henderson Field, one hut served as a command post where Marine Major General Alexander Vandegrift planned the defense that would change the course of the Pacific War. Thousands of miles away, in the frozen Aleutians, sailors struggled against icy winds that sliced through everything except the Quonset huts. Engineers had modified the design with reinforced insulation and stove piping that could vent smoke without freezing shut. The curved roofs shed snow effortlessly, preventing collapse under tons of ice. In North Africa, under a blazing Saharan sun, British and American troops used the same design with minor tweaks, canvas ventilation flaps and extra windows to let hot air escape. The corrugated steel shimmered like liquid mercury, but inside, temperatures remained tolerable thanks to air gaps and insulation. It wasn't just durability that made the huts indispensable. It was their modularity. 2 huts could be joined end-to-end to form longer structures. A series of 10 could create a warehouse, a barracks, even an aircraft hangar. On an airfield outside Tobruk, pilots of the 57th Fighter Group gathered inside one such connected row, their briefing hut. Maps hung on the curved walls, and a small fan hummed above the heat. Major Karl, Tex Weaver pointed at a red line on the wall chart. "Our target's here, West Ridge, German fuel dump. We're wheels up in 20. Outside, the sun rose over the steel domes like a row of silver eggs, the architecture of war, efficient and unstoppable. Even as bombs fell and shells thundered, these huts endured. Shrapnel sometimes pierced the walls, but the curved structure deflected most blasts outward. Many soldiers swore that the arch saved their lives more than once. By 1944, over 100,000 Quonset huts had been deployed across every theater of war. The name had become as common in the military lexicon as Jeep or Foxhole. And yet, as indestructible as they seemed, each hut carried a human story, of exhaustion, camaraderie, and fleeting comfort amid destruction. Soldiers scrawled their names inside the steel, carved dates into the plywood floors, and pinned photos of loved ones to the walls. In the quiet hours before battle, these curved shells became more than engineering marvels. They became homes, temporary sanctuaries where men could remember the world they were fighting to protect. June 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The night sky burned orange as naval shells screamed overhead. The beach was chaos, explosions ripping through palm trees, sand turned to glass, and men shouting orders through the thunder of artillery. Amid the confusion, rows of curved steel huts stood firm, half buried in debris but still intact. The Quonset huts had landed with the first wave of the U.S. Seabees, their components packed neatly in wooden crates marked QH-16, Navy issue. Within days of securing a beachhead, engineers had thrown them up along the shoreline, command posts, radio rooms, and makeshift hospitals. Now they were being tested like never before. Inside one hut near the edge of the airfield, Lieutenant John Latham crouched over a radio transmitter. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he relayed coordinates to the fleet offshore. The air smelled of ozone and burnt rubber. Each blast outside made the thin walls shudder, dust raining down from the curved ceiling. "Sir," a young corporal yelled, pointing upward as a shell detonated barely 50 yards away. The blast wave rolled over the hut, a deafening roar that flattened palm trees and tossed debris like confetti. But the arched frame held, flexing, absorbing, then settling again. When the ringing in their ears faded, Latham exhaled. "Still standing," he said, half in disbelief. That was the miracle of the Quonset's design. Its curved surface didn't fight the shockwave, it flowed with it. Where flat walls would splinter or collapse, the arch distributed force evenly, giving way just enough to survive the hit. Engineers had unknowingly created one of the most blast-resistant forms in wartime architecture. Across the Pacific, reports poured in, Quonset huts withstood typhoons, mortar fire, and even near-miss bombings. On Guam, one was buried under 3 feet of volcanic ash, and dug out days later, still usable. In the jungles of New Guinea, torrential rain hammered huts like drum skins, but none collapsed. Soldiers joked that the huts could outlast the war, and maybe even them. Even the Japanese, when capturing Allied positions, often reused the huts rather than destroy them. The practicality was undeniable. But endurance came at a price. The steel walls trapped heat like ovens in tropical climates. Men working inside stripped to their undershirts, sweat pooling at their feet. In the Pacific, it was common to see doors and windows propped open with ammunition crates to let in air. Engineers responded by issuing tropical modification kits, extra vents, reflective coatings, and layered insulation that helped keep interiors habitable. Back in the States, the production frenzy only intensified. Factories in Rhode Island, Mississippi, and California churned out parts day and night. Each new model carried subtle improvements: wider spans, better ventilation, adjustable frames. The Navy, the Army, and even the Red Cross adopted the design for their own purposes. Meanwhile, in Europe, the huts followed the advancing Allied armies. From Normandy to Antwerp, they rose in muddy fields and bombed out villages, housing everything from mess halls to intelligence units. One hut near Cherbourg served as a mobile aircraft maintenance shop for P-47 Thunderbolts. Another, on the edge of a Belgian forest, became a field hospital where medics worked through freezing nights, the sound of artillery echoing outside. Sergeant Henry Wells later recalled, "The roof would shake every time the Germans shelled us, but it never broke. We lost trucks, tents, even tanks, but the Quonset stayed." By late 1944, the Quonset hut was as essential to the Allied war effort as the jeep or the landing craft. It had become part of the landscape, unglamorous, uncelebrated, but utterly indispensable. And yet, as the war dragged toward its bloody climax, its story was far from over. For the engineers who built it, and the soldiers who lived beneath its arched ribs, the Quonset hut was more than steel and bolts. It was a promise that no matter how chaotic the world became, there would always be a roof over their heads and a place to rebuild from the ashes. August 1945. Okinawa, Japan. The war was ending, but the landscape looked like the surface of another planet, blackened, cratered, silent. Amid the wreckage, hundreds of Quonset huts stood in neat rows, their corrugated shells reflecting the dull morning light. Where once there had been tents and trenches, now there were mess halls, offices, and field hospitals. Inside one hut, Lieutenant Commander Peter de Jong, older now, weary, and streaked with gray, ran his hand across the steel ribs. Still standing, he murmured the same words he'd spoken 4 years earlier on a Rhode Island airfield. Around him, men were packing up supplies, loading trucks, and preparing for home. The war was over. But for the Quonset hut, its mission had only just begun. When peace returned, the U.S. military faced a new problem: surplus. More than 150,000 Quonset huts had been produced by war's end, enough to circle the earth twice if laid end to end. They dotted nearly every Allied base, from Normandy to New Guinea, from Iceland to the Philippines. Instead of scrapping them, the U.S. government saw opportunity. War had given birth to a new kind of architecture, one that could now help rebuild the world. Shiploads of huts were disassembled, packed into crates once again, and shipped across oceans, this time not for war, but for recovery. In war-torn Europe and Asia, Quonset huts became classrooms, hospitals, refugee shelters, and administrative offices. The same design that had endured bombs and storms now sheltered families and orphans. In England, Quonsets popped up on the outskirts of London, serving as emergency housing for those displaced by the Blitz. In France, they became temporary schools and bakeries. In Japan, occupation forces used them as police stations and command centers. And back home in the United States, returning soldiers were desperate for housing. The GI Bill promised homes and education, but the post-war construction boom couldn't keep up. That's when the Quonset hut found its most unexpected role, as a symbol of American homecoming. Entire neighborhoods sprang up made of curved steel. One of the most famous was Veterans Village, in Los Angeles, a community of over 700 Quonset huts housing thousands of returning servicemen and their families. Inside, housewives hung curtains over porthole windows. Children chalked hopscotch grids on the plywood floors. Soldiers who'd lived in these huts under fire now raised their babies under the same arches of corrugated steel. In newspapers, some called them ugly ducklings. Others saw them as modern, minimalist, and efficient, the architecture of a new, practical America. Architects and designers began experimenting, turning the military huts into modern homes, workshops, and even churches. The simplicity of the design, two-end walls, a curved shell, and infinite possibilities, inspired an entire post-war movement in prefab architecture. De Jong, now working for the Department of Defense Engineering Division, visited one such project in California in 1946. He stood outside a Quonset hut converted into a family home, complete with a white picket fence and a mailbox. A small boy rode a tricycle down the curved walkway, laughing as the metal walls gleamed in the sun. De Jong smiled faintly. "We built them to survive war," he said, "but maybe they were meant to build peace." Through the late 1940s and 1950s, the hut spread even further. Universities used them as dormitories, farmers as storage sheds, scientists as Arctic research stations. The U.S. Navy even adapted them into floating versions for remote island installations. The simplicity of the Quonset's design became a universal language. Anyone, anywhere, could assemble one, no architect needed, no special tools required. It was democratic design at its purest. By the time the Korean War erupted, the huts were still serving faithfully, sheltering another generation of soldiers and engineers. But even as technology advanced and new materials replaced steel and wood, the Quonset hut refused to disappear. Many still stand today, rusted, patched, repainted, silent witnesses to a world that was once at war and then rebuilt itself under their curved roofs. In the end, the Quonset hut's story isn't just about metal and bolts. It's about resilience, of design, of human spirit, of the will to endure. It was born from urgency, refined by necessity, and immortalized by the millions who lived, fought, healed, and dreamed beneath its arch. From the jungles of Guadalcanal to the farmlands of Kansas, from the beaches of Saipan to the suburbs of California, the Quonset hut remains, simple, strong, and eternal. Its curved silhouette, once a symbol of war, became the shape of survival itself.